It's always fun to look at things from a new perspective, and when you do so, you can get a better understanding of it. By shining a different light, you can see it in a new way that you might not have before. I'd like to do the same with Shadows of Evil. We always look at Shadows of Evil from the perspective of our four characters. We see them as four sinners who just kind of got thrown into this world, and first were tricked by the Shadowman, and then tried to undo what they had done to help the Shadowman by working with the Keepers. And then Richtofen steps in and steals the summoning key at a very opportune moment. But if you look at it from a different perspective, you can actually see there's a lot of build up to it, and Richtofen plays a larger role than you might think. In order to really get into the backstory of Shadows of Evil, let's look at a character known as the Reporter. That's all we really know him as. We have this snippet of the timeline right here, and some of this may sound familiar if you've listened to any of the Shadows of Evil radios or telephones that are found on the map. It begins with October 21st, 1943. Posing as Mr. Rapp, the Shadow Man hires a reporter to recover artifacts from South Pacific and Russia. We then move on to December 14th, 1943. The reporter recovers the artifacts from the South Pacific and Russia. Among them is the summoning key. The summoning key is what the Shadow Man's after. This has been his overall goal. This is what he was working towards in Shadows of Evil, and this is also what he used in Revelations in an effort to sort of bring all the Apothicons into that world. It's kind of one of the first steps to unleashing the Apothicons. This is his main goal. Now next we have December 31st, 1943. At Mr. Rapp's request, the reporter arrives in Morgue City to take in the sights, sounds, and smells. This is actually something you may specifically remember from a radio in Shadows of Evil. That is a direct quote right there, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells of Morgue City. Now, why he sent the reporter to Morgue City is difficult to pin down, but I believe that it has a bit of significance to the world of Apothicons and Keepers. Part of this comes from the next snippet of the timeline. February 13th, 1944, a fruit vendor tells the reporter about the ancient order of the Keepers and how they are the only ones holding back the forces of the apocalypse. He talks of people hearing chanting from beneath the city. When he talks about beneath the city, he might actually be referring to the second secret city below Shadows of Evil. If you go into the Pack-a-Punch room and start to really look below the grounds, you can see there are cities back in the distance, and they go pretty deep far down this crater. There is a whole separate world under Shadows of Evil, and this is why I believe Shadows of Evil, if I can say, is spiritually significant or significant to the Aether and the Keepers. This is a realm that is important to them, so this is why maybe the reporter, or Mr. Rapp, is having the reporter go to Morgue City. While all of this is going on and the reporter is doing his investigating around Shadows of Evil, Mr. Rapp, or the Shadow Man, is beginning to manipulate our four characters within Shadows of Evil. Using them was a part of his plan. He actually started to set up these scenarios and circumstances and manipulate them into thinking that their back's against the walls and they're desperate, and the only thing they can do to get out of these tight situations they're in is to commit the crimes they do or the sins that force them to enter Shadows of Evil. So this was always a part of his plan. He always wanted to use those four characters, except there was a hitch in the road. As we learn on February 5th, 1944, aware of the Shadow Man's actions, Monty writes to the reporter, warning him not to give the summoning key to anyone. And then, as we learn in the next bit of the timeline, April 22nd, 1944, Richtofen learns that the reporter has the summoning key and confronts him. The reporter waves Monty's letter at Richtofen and orders him to stay away before attacking him. Richtofen kills the reporter in self-defense. This is when everything starts to go awry, and this is really when Shadows of Evil starts to begin. So Richtofen was already in Morgue City prior to Shadows of Evil. I know a lot of people think that he just popped in right at the end. No, he was already there. In fact, in many ways, he was one of the causes of Shadows of Evil. So while the Shadow Man sort of had everything in motion and everything was lining up to work out, Monty steps in. Monty writes him a letter saying, "Don't give it to anyone." And when we look at Richtofen's perspective of the situation, which he writes about in a cipher, we learn, I met the reporter who was to deliver the artifact. He said he was going to bring it on his truck in a crate, but when I arrived, the reporter was babbling and acting wildly, waving a letter in his hand, telling me to stay away. The crate containing the artifact had been sealed with some ancient magic. When I told him I must have the artifact and moved towards the crate, he attacked me. I acted in self-defense, stabbing him in the chest. You see, the reporter had heeded Monty's warning. He had listened to what he was saying, and he understood that this isn't something that should fall into the hands of anybody. And then they placed sort of a magic sort of spell on it, or put a bit of magic on it. And that's why when you look at the crate in Shadows of Evil, it has all those little like chains going around it. That's what's going on there, and that's why it's sitting in the back of a truck. Richtofen had actually killed the one man who was willing to defend the summoning key. The reporter realized he can't give this to the Shadowman. He's not going to give it to Richtofen. This is very special and it needs to be protected, but Richtofen got in the way of that and stabbed the reporter. Had he stabbed the reporter, maybe he would have listened to further instructions from Monty and moved the summoning key somewhere else, and by moving the summoning key somewhere else, this would make it harder for the Shadowman to get his hands on it, most likely preventing Shadows of Evil and the destruction of that universe. In many ways, it was Richtofen stabbing the reporter that left the summoning key unguarded, that sort of forced everything to happen. In many ways, Shadows of Evil could have been prevented, but it was Richtofen stabbing the reporter that caused Shadows of Evil. It's an interesting perspective to look on Shadows of Evil, because some ways Shadows of Evil seems inevitable. The Shadowman would have found some way to manipulate somebody into opening the summoning key, but it had looked as though he was thwarted this time, but Richtofen unknowingly actually helped the Shadowman in this instance and kind of spurred everything else that would go on, because then Shadows of Evil happens, and the Shadowmans end up getting trapped in the summoning key, and then he ends up appearing in the house in Revelations, and this brings on the Second Great War. This simple mistake of stabbing the reporter in the chest, they could have easily had just spoken about this and understood the severity of the situation, no, but the reporter got a little antsy, stabbed Richtofen, and then Richtofen attacked him back and killed him, and then this kind of caused everything to happen. Now, maybe it could have gone a different way, and maybe because this is a game, we're looking too far into it, and we're taking things that really don't need to be looked at like this. But it's still a fun and new and interesting way to look at Shadows of Evil. It's going to wrap things up for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it interesting, maybe give it a like, possibly subscribe for more. I'm always covering the zombie storyline, so if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy the next one. Have a fantastic day, and bye.